I never imagined that the child I had carried in my womb, the daughter I had raised with every ounce of love and sacrifice I had, would one day turn against me. That she would stand in a courtroom, eyes burning with anger, and accuse me of kidnapping her children, the very children I had fed, rocked to sleep, and raised for 13 long years. It sounds like the plot of a tragic drama, but this is my life. This is the story I never thought I'd have to tell. I am a 57-year-old woman. Once upon a time, I thought my life would be simple. I dreamed of growing old with my husband, raising our only daughter in a modest but loving home, and perhaps one day spoiling a grandchild or two. But life has never been kind, not to me, not to my family. When my daughter was only 14, my husband, her father, died suddenly of a heart attack. One moment we were eating dinner together. The next moment I was screaming over his body, begging him to wake up. He never did. I lost my partner that night, and my daughter lost her father. She was too young to process it, and I was too broken to guide her through the grief. I buried myself in work, juggling bills, debts, and the emptiness of widowhood. I told myself I was doing it for her, but in truth, I was just trying to survive. I didn't notice how my daughter's light dimmed, how she became restless, searching for comfort in places I could not give. By the time she turned 21, she had already fallen into the arms of a man named Victor. He was older, charming in a shallow way, and I hated him instantly. There was something in his smile that felt hollow, something in his eyes that chilled me. I tried to warn her, begged her to reconsider, but she accused me of being controlling, of not wanting her to live her life. And then, just like that, she was gone. She walked out of my house with her bags, packed, her hand entwined with his, and she never looked back. Years passed in silence. I sent letters that came back unopened. I left messages that were never returned. My daughter had vanished into his world, and I had no choice but to let her go. I told myself she would return when she was ready, but the years dragged on, and my hope grew thinner with each season that passed without her. Then one night there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, I found my daughter standing there holding a baby no more than a few weeks old. Her hair was unkempt, her eyes swollen from crying, and her hands shook as she thrust the child into my arms. "Mom, I can't do this," she whispered. "Please, just take her." Before I could ask a single question, she was gone. I stood there in shock, the tiny infant squirming against my chest. Her cries were soft and helpless, and as I held her close, something inside me broke and healed all at once. My heart ached for my daughter, but at the same time, I felt the fierce surge of love only a mother or grandmother can feel. I promised myself that no matter what happened, I would protect this baby. A year later, it happened again. My daughter appeared thinner this time, more haggard, with another baby in her arms. She didn't stay long, just pressed the boy into my embrace and muttered something about not being able to cope. And then she was gone. By the third time, I wasn't even surprised. Another year had passed, and she returned with another baby, another little life she couldn't manage. She left him with me as if he were a parcel she didn't know what to do with, and disappeared once more. That was 13 years ago. For 13 years, I became their mother in everything but name. I was the one who stayed up through sleepless nights, pacing the floor with a feverish child in my arms. I was the one who walked them to kindergarten, cheered at school plays, saved every penny to buy new clothes, and comforted them when other children asked why they didn't have a real mom. I was there for every scraped knee, every heartbreak, every exam. My back bent with the weight of age and exhaustion, but my heart swelled with love for them. They were my life. They were my second chance at motherhood, and I embraced it with all that I had. During those years, my daughter was a ghost. She would send the occasional letter, sometimes money, never enough, never consistent. But she never stayed, never asked about the milestones she missed. It hurt, but I convinced myself that one day she would return for good and we would mend what was broken. But when she finally did return, it wasn't the reunion I had imagined in my prayers. It was a warm August morning. I was in the kitchen making pancakes when the front door creaked open. I turned spatula in hand and froze. My daughter stood there. She was older now, her beauty sharpened into something brittle, her posture stiff. And next to her stood Victor. His presence filled the room like a shadow, suffocating and unwelcome. My stomach turned as I recognized the same cold gleam in his eyes. My heart leapt with cautious hope. Was she here to reclaim her place, to finally be the mother her children longed for? But the words that spilled from her lips shattered me. "Mom," she said, her voice flat and sharp, "you kidnapped my children. I've come to take them back." At first I laughed an incredulous, desperate sound. It had to be a mistake, a cruel joke. But her face didn't soften, and Victor's smirk widened, feeding off my disbelief. I tried to remind her of the truth, of the nights she placed those babies in my arms, of the years she vanished without a trace. "You left them with me. You begged me to take care of them." I cried, but she shook her head, her eyes brimming not with tears, but with a fury I didn't recognize. "No, that's the story you tell. But the truth is, you stole them. You manipulated me. You stole 13 years of their lives." Her words cut deeper than any knife. 13 years of sacrifice, of pouring my soul into raising her children, dismissed as lies. I felt the floor tilt beneath me, the world collapsing. My own daughter, the child I had carried, nursed, comforted, was looking at me as if I were a criminal. Within weeks, court papers arrived. She had filed charges, accusations of abduction, manipulation, alienation. I became the subject of whispers in the neighborhood, the woman who might have stolen her own grandchildren. Officials came to my home, rummaging through photo albums, asking questions that made me feel like I was on trial for crimes I hadn't committed. And through it all, the children clung to me, confused and frightened, their little faces pale with dread. "Grandma," they whispered, "are they going to take us away?" That night, after everyone was asleep, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the dark window pane. My reflection looked back at me, tired, hollow, old. My hands trembled as I whispered to myself, "What did I do wrong? How did it come to this?" But deep down, I already knew. This was only the beginning. The first time I walked into the courtroom, it felt as if every pair of eyes turned against me. The air was heavy, suffocating, and the sound of my own footsteps echoed like a verdict before the trial had even begun. I had never been in a courtroom before. I was a simple woman, a grandmother who spent her life raising children, baking bread, and stretching every dollar to keep a roof over our heads. But now, I stood accused of being something I could never imagine: a kidnapper. My daughter sat on the opposite side. She didn't look at me, not even once. She kept her gaze fixed on the papers in front of her, her face set like stone. And beside her, like a snake coiled in the grass, was Victor. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, exuding smugness. Every now and then, he would lean toward her, whisper something in her ear, and she would nod mechanically, as if under a spell. When it was my turn to speak, my voice trembled. I told them everything: the night my daughter left the first baby with me, the years of raising all 3 children, the endless absence, the nights I prayed for her return. My words poured out like water from a broken dam, raw and desperate. I showed them photo albums filled with birthday parties, Christmas mornings, first days of school. I thought naively that these memories would matter, that the truth would protect me. But Victor's lawyer was ruthless. He painted me as a controlling mother obsessed with keeping my daughter under my roof. He twisted my sacrifices into accusations. He claimed that I had manipulated her fragile mind after her husband's death, convincing her she was unfit to parent. He suggested that I had orchestrated her absence, isolating her from her children, so I could keep them for myself. Each word felt like poison injected straight into my veins. I wanted to scream, to shake my daughter, and remind her of the truth, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. She sat there, her expression blank, as if she had erased 13 years from her memory. The children weren't allowed in the courtroom, but their absence weighed heavily on me. I thought of their faces, the way they cried when I told them I had to leave for court, their tiny hands clutching at my skirt, begging me not to go. "Grandma, don't let them take us," they whispered. Those words haunted me, echoing louder than the judge's gavel, louder than Victor's lies. After the first hearing, I returned home to find my granddaughter, the eldest, now 13, waiting at the door. Her eyes were red from crying, her voice trembling. "Grandma, is it true? Did you really take us from Mom?" The question pierced my heart. I fell to my knees, holding her shoulders, looking into her face, the face of the baby I once rocked to sleep. "No, sweetheart. I didn't take you. Your mom left you with me. She asked me to care for you because she couldn't." She stared at me for a long time, her young mind torn between loyalty and love, between the words of her mother and the truth of her grandmother. And then, in a voice so small it nearly broke me, she whispered, "I believe you." But belief wasn't enough to stop the storm. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal documents, whispered conversations with lawyers I couldn't afford, and restless nights lying awake staring at the ceiling. I was terrified of losing them, the children who had become my everything. They weren't just my grandchildren. They were my reason for waking up every morning, for pushing through the aches of my aging body. Without them, my house would be nothing but empty walls echoing with ghosts of laughter long gone. But what hurt the most wasn't the threat of losing them. It was the betrayal of my own daughter. I replayed our past over and over, searching for answers. Where had I failed her? Was it in the years after her father died, when I buried myself in work and left her to grieve alone? Was it in the fights we had about Victor, when I pushed too hard, desperate to make her see the danger I saw? Or was it simply that she had grown into someone I no longer recognized, shaped by choices I couldn't control? The more I thought, the deeper the guilt sank. Maybe she was right. Maybe I hadn't done enough for her. Maybe I had been so focused on survival that I missed the cries of my only child. And now she was punishing me the only way she knew how, by ripping away the very thing I loved most. The second hearing was worse. They brought witnesses, neighbors, old acquaintances, people who barely knew us, yet spoke as if they had lived inside our home. One neighbor testified that I was overly possessive of the children, that I rarely let them visit friends, that I was obsessed with control. They twisted my protectiveness into tyranny. They made me out to be a jailer instead of a grandmother. My hands shook as I listened. My body felt cold, my heart pounding so loud I thought it might burst. I tried to defend myself, but every word I spoke seemed to dissolve in the air, drowned out by the voices stacked against me. And still, my daughter would not look at me. It was during the recess of that second hearing that something happened, something that deepened the mystery, something that made me realize this was about more than just betrayal. I was walking toward the restroom when I overheard Victor speaking in hushed tones on the phone. I couldn't hear everything, but one sentence sent chills down my spine. "Don't worry. Once we have the kids, the inheritance is as good as ours." Inheritance. My breath caught. My husband had left a small sum of money in a trust intended for our daughter and her children. It wasn't much, but it was something a nest egg meant to secure their future. I had always protected it, never touching a cent, waiting for the right time to pass it down. Could this be what all of this was about? Suddenly, the pieces began to fit. My daughter's sudden reappearance, the venom in her accusations, Victor's eagerness. This wasn't about her wanting to be a mother again. This was about money. My knees went weak as the realization hit. My daughter wasn't just lost, she was being used, manipulated, twisted by the man I had always feared, the man who had stolen her from me all those years ago. And she was letting him do it. When I returned to the courtroom, I tried to speak, tried to warn the judge, but my words were brushed aside as baseless accusations. Without proof, they were just the desperate ramblings of a cornered woman. That night, I broke down. I sat on the kitchen floor clutching one of the children's old stuffed animals and sobbed until I could no longer breathe. My chest ached, my body shook, and for the first time in years, I whispered to God, begging for strength. I didn't care about myself anymore. I only cared about saving those children from losing their home, from being dragged into the toxic web Victor was spinning. But deep down, a darker thought gnawed at me. What if I couldn't save them? What if I lost? What if, after 13 years of love and sacrifice, they were torn from my arms and handed to a woman who had abandoned them, and a man who saw them only as a key to money? The thought was unbearable, and yet it loomed closer with each passing day. The day the children were called to speak will forever remain carved into my heart. I had begged my lawyer to spare them, to shield them from the cold eyes of the court and the cruel questions of men who saw them only as pawns. But the judge insisted. He wanted to hear from them directly, to understand where their loyalty lay. When my eldest walked in, her little shoulders squared like a soldier marching to war, I nearly broke down. She was only 13, but in that moment, she carried the weight of generations of broken promises and unspoken love. She sat in the witness chair, her small hands folded tightly in her lap, and when asked where she wanted to live, she lifted her chin and said with a strength that startled even me with my grandmother, "She raised us. She is our home." Victor shifted in his chair, his jaw tightening. My daughter glanced at him nervously but said nothing. The middle child followed, 11 years old, his voice quivering but clear. He told the judge how I had been there for every scraped knee, every homework project, every night when nightmares woke him crying. "Grandma never left us," he said, his eyes darting toward his mother. "She never gave up on us." By the time my youngest was brought in, the courtroom was already heavy with tension. She was only 8, so small her feet barely reached the floor. When asked the same question, she burst into tears, her tiny body shaking. She didn't answer with words. Instead, she ran from the chair straight into my arms, clinging to me as if her life depended on it. The bailiff tried to pull her away, but the judge raised his hand, allowing her to stay there, sobbing into my chest. It was the rawest truth anyone could have witnessed. But Victor's lawyer wasn't moved. He stood and began asking cruel, calculated questions. "Did your grandmother ever tell you that your mother abandoned you? Did she ever say your mother was a bad person? Did she make you afraid of your mother?" I wanted to object, to scream, but my lawyer squeezed my hand, whispering to stay calm. My eldest answered firmly, "No. She told us Mom loved us. She told us Mom was sick and needed time. She never made us hate her." It should have ended there. But Victor wasn't finished. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on my daughter, and whispered something I couldn't hear. She suddenly stood up, demanding to speak. The judge, hesitant but curious, allowed it. Her voice was cold, trembling, but sharp as glass. "My mother may have left them with you, but you never let her come back. You made her believe she wasn't good enough. You wanted her children for yourself." Those words stabbed me deeper than any knife. My knees nearly buckled. My own flesh and blood stood in a courtroom accusing me of chaining her away from her own children. And worst of all, she believed it. The judge called for a recess. I rushed to the bathroom, locking myself inside, clutching the sink as my reflection blurred behind tears. I whispered to myself over and over, "It's not true. It's not true. I did everything for her, for them." But the voice in my head, Victor's voice, my daughter's voice, kept replaying, "You wanted them for yourself." When the recess ended, I walked back into the courtroom, my face pale, my body trembling. I was a woman unraveling, fighting a battle on too many fronts against Victor, against the system, against my own daughter's poisoned beliefs. But that night, something happened that cracked the darkness wide open. My eldest granddaughter came into my room after the younger ones had gone to bed. She sat quietly at the edge of my bed, her face solemn. "Grandma," she whispered, "I need to tell you something." She pulled out a crumpled notebook from her backpack. Inside were pages filled with her writing. She had been keeping notes of things she overheard between her mother and Victor. And what I read chilled me to the bone. Victor wasn't just after custody. He was after money, just as I had suspected. But worse, he had convinced my daughter that I had been hiding the inheritance from her, using the children as leverage. He had told her I was planning to keep it all for myself, to die with it in my name, and leave her with nothing. It was all lies, of course. The inheritance had been untouched, sitting safely in trust for the children's future. I had never hidden it, I had only waited for the right time. But Victor had twisted that silence into betrayal, feeding my daughter poison until she believed it. I hugged my granddaughter, tears streaming down my face. "Thank you, my love. You are braver than you know." The next day, I brought the notebook to my lawyer. He warned me it might not be admissible as hard evidence, but it could strengthen our case, show the judge the depth of manipulation at play. For the first time, I felt a flicker of hope. Yet hope was fragile, constantly under siege. At the next hearing, Victor presented new witnesses, people I had never seen before, claiming to be friends of my daughter. They testified that she had always wanted to come back for her children, but I had threatened her, told her she would never be welcome. Their lies painted me as a monster. I looked at my daughter, begging her with my eyes to speak up, to tell the truth. But she sat frozen, her hands clenched, her face pale. She didn't support their lies, but she didn't deny them either. Her silence was another knife in my chest. Outside the courtroom, I confronted her in the hallway. For the first time in months, she looked at me directly. Her eyes were filled with tears. "Mom, I don't know what to believe anymore. He says one thing, you say another. All I know is I lost 13 years of my children's lives, and part of me blames you for that." Her words shattered me, but in her voice I heard something else: hesitation. A sliver of doubt about Victor, a tiny crack in the armor he had built around her. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered the house, touching the walls, the photos, the toys scattered across the floor. Every corner of that house whispered with memories, my daughter's laughter as a child, the footsteps of my grandchildren, growing up the echoes of love and loss. I realized then that this fight wasn't just about custody. It wasn't even just about saving the children. It was about saving my daughter from him, from herself, from the lies that had chained her heart for so long. But the road ahead was dark, and I didn't know if I had the strength to walk it. The final hearing loomed closer, and the tension grew unbearable. Every day felt like a countdown to a verdict that could destroy everything. My body ached from stress, my hair grayed faster, but I kept going for them. And then, just days before the final hearing, the phone rang. It was my daughter. Her voice was trembling, broken. She whispered words that froze my blood. "Mom, you were right. He's not who I thought he was. He's worse. But if I leave him, he'll destroy me." I begged her to come home. I told her she would be safe, that the children needed her. She cried, whispering, "I'm sorry," before hanging up. I sat there in the silence, my heart pounding, tears streaming down my face. For the first time, I knew she wasn't my enemy. She was as much a victim as the children were. But knowing that didn't make the fight easier, because the very next day in court, she was back at his side, her face a mask, her body trembling but obedient. The storm was reaching its peak, and I could feel it. The truth was clawing its way toward the surface, desperate to be seen. But I didn't know if it would save us or tear us apart completely. The day of the final hearing felt like standing at the edge of a cliff with no ground beneath me. I woke before dawn, the house unnervingly silent. The children were still asleep, curled together, as if their closeness could shield them from the storm outside. I watched them for a long time, memorizing their faces in the soft light of morning. I whispered a silent prayer that no matter what happened, they would never doubt how fiercely they were loved. The courtroom was packed that day, every seat filled. The air buzzed with a tension so sharp it could slice skin. My hands trembled as I clutched the folder of documents my lawyer and I had assembled: bank records, trust documents, and most importantly, the notebook my granddaughter had written. This was our last chance. Victor entered with the confidence of a man certain of victory. He wore a crisp suit, his hair slicked back his arm, draped possessively around my daughter's shoulders. She looked pale, hollow, as though each step was dragged out of her by invisible chains. I wanted to run to her to shake her free, but I stayed rooted to my chair. The proceedings began with Victor's lawyer delivering a scathing attack. He painted me as manipulative, controlling, even dangerous. He described me as an old woman clinging desperately to children who weren't mine. "This is not a grandmother," he sneered. "This is a woman who has built her entire identity on keeping these children hostage." My heart pounded, but I held my tongue. I had learned by now that my anger only fed their narrative. I needed to stay calm, no matter how much his words clawed at me. Then it was my turn. My lawyer stood his voice steady and began to present the evidence we had gathered. He laid out the timeline of my daughter's disappearance, the years of absence, the proof that she had willingly left the children in my care. He presented the trust documents showing clearly that the inheritance remained untouched, waiting for the children when they were grown. And then he pulled out the notebook. My granddaughter's words echoed through the courtroom as he read them aloud. Words about Victor's manipulation, his obsession with money, his lies about me. Each sentence was a dagger slicing through the facade Victor had built. The room shifted. I saw the judge lean forward, his expression darkening. I saw murmurs ripple through the audience. And for the first time, I saw Victor's mask crack. But the moment that will stay with me forever came when my daughter was asked to take the stand. She walked slowly, her hands trembling, her face pale as parchment. She sat in the chair, avoiding my eyes, staring at the floor. The lawyer asked her simple questions first: her name, her relationship to the children. Then came the harder ones. "Did you willingly leave your children with your mother 13 years ago?" She hesitated. Victor's gaze bore into her sharp as knives. I saw her throat tighten, her lips tremble. Finally, in a voice barely audible, she whispered, "Yes." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Victor's head snapped toward her, his eyes blazing. But she didn't stop. "I left them because I couldn't cope," she continued, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I thought it would only be for a little while, but then I met him." She gestured weakly toward Victor. "And everything changed." Her voice cracked. "He told me my mother didn't want me back. He told me she hated me, that she wanted my children for herself. He said she was stealing from me. I believed him. I believed everything he said." The silence in the courtroom was deafening. I couldn't breathe. My chest ached as tears poured down my face. After all these years, after all the lies, she was finally speaking the truth. Victor leapt to his feet, shouting, his voice echoing off the walls. "She's lying. She's confused. You can't believe her. She's unstable." The judge slammed his gavel, demanding order. But the damage was done. Victor's composure had shattered, his fury laid bare for everyone to see. My daughter broke down completely, sobbing into her hands. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I thought you took them from me, but it was him. It was always him." I wanted to run to her to hold her, but the bailiff held me back. All I could do was whisper across the silence, "I forgive you. I love you. Always." The judge recessed the court for deliberation. The room erupted in chaos, lawyers arguing, reporters scribbling notes, whispers flying. But all I could see was my daughter, broken and trembling, finally free of his grip. Outside the courtroom, as we waited for the decision, something happened that I will never forget. My daughter came to me. For the first time in 13 years, she walked into my arms. We clung to each other, sobbing, both of us trembling like children. "I was so lost," she whispered. "He made me hate you. He made me hate myself." I stroked her hair, my tears soaking into her shoulder. "You're home now?" I whispered. "That's all that matters." But even as we held each other, fear gnawed at me. Would the judge see the truth? Or would the years of lies outweigh the moments of clarity? When court reconvened, the judge's voice was steady, deliberate. He acknowledged the years of sacrifice I had given, the clear evidence of manipulation, and most importantly, the children's own voices. He ruled in my favor. Custody remained with me. The courtroom erupted, gasps, shouts, murmurs. But all I heard was the sound of my grandchildren rushing toward me, their arms wrapping around my waist, their voices crying, "Grandma, Grandma." I held them close, my heart bursting with relief and gratitude. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe, but the victory was bittersweet. My daughter, though freed from Victor's grasp, was broken, her spirit battered. She would need time, perhaps years, to heal from the damage he had done. I promised myself I would be there for her, no matter how long it took. Victor was escorted out of the courtroom, his face twisted with rage. I knew this wasn't the last we would see of him. Men like him didn't disappear quietly. But for now, he had lost. For now, we were safe. That night, we returned home together, me, my daughter, and the children. For the first time in 13 years, we sat around the same table, eating dinner as a family. The wounds were deep, the scars permanent, but there was hope. And for me, hope was enough. I thought the nightmare was over, but I was wrong. Because, as the days passed, more secrets began to surface. Secrets even darker than I had imagined. And I realized that while Victor was gone, his shadow still lingered over our lives. And I began to wonder, had we truly escaped? Or was this just the beginning of another storm? The days following the hearing were a blur of relief, exhaustion, and an almost unbearable heaviness. The ruling had gone in my favor, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Victor wasn't finished. Men like him thrived in shadows, pulling strings long after the spotlight turned away. At night, I would sit at the kitchen table, the house quiet, except for the soft breathing of the children upstairs, and wonder what came next. My daughter had come home with us, but her presence was fragile, like a bird that had been caged for too long and no longer trusted its own wings. She would drift through the house, silently pausing to watch her children, her eyes brimming with guilt. Sometimes she would reach for them, only to stop herself, as though afraid she no longer had the right. One evening, as we cleared the table after dinner, she finally spoke. "I don't deserve them," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You raised them. You're their mother now." Her words broke me. I dropped the dish I was holding, porcelain shattering across the floor. "No," I said firmly, grabbing her hands. "You are their mother. You always will be. Nothing can change that. They love you. They need you." Tears streaked down her face. "But they look at me like I'm a stranger. They just need time," I told her. "Time and proof. You show up every day. You love them even when it hurts. That's what will bring them back to you." She nodded, but I could see the doubt gnawing at her. And then, just as the first fragile threads of healing began to weave between us, the storm returned. It started with a letter. A plain envelope slid under our door one morning. My heart froze when I saw the handwriting. Victor's. Inside was a single line scrawled in his sharp, angry script. "This isn't over." Fear coiled in my stomach. I didn't tell the children, but my daughter saw my face pale as I read the words. "It's him, isn't it?" she asked, her voice trembling. I nodded. He won't let go. Over the next weeks, strange things began happening. A car parked across the street for hours at a time. Hang-up calls in the middle of the night. An unfamiliar figure spotted near the schoolyard. The children grew anxious, clinging to me when I tried to drop them off at school. My daughter barely slept, pacing the house at night, her eyes hollow with fear. We reported everything to the police, but without concrete evidence, their hands were tied. "Stay vigilant," they advised. "Document everything." It felt like living in a war zone, waiting for an attack we couldn't see. And then it happened. One afternoon, my youngest grandson didn't come out of school at pickup. Panic surged through me as the minutes stretched into an eternity. Finally, a teacher rushed out, pale and shaken. "A man tried to talk to him," she said. "He said he was his grandfather. But your grandson ran back inside and told us. We called the police." I nearly collapsed with relief, pulling the child into my arms. But rage burned through me like wildfire. He had crossed a line. That night, my daughter and I sat together at the kitchen table, our hands clasped tightly. "We can't live like this," she whispered. "He'll never stop. Not until he destroys us." Her voice steadied, her eyes fierce in a way I hadn't seen in years. "Mom, I have to fight this with you. No more hiding. No more letting him pull the strings. If I don't stand up to him now, I never will." I looked at her, pride swelling in my chest. She wasn't the broken girl he had manipulated anymore. She was finding her strength again. Together, we decided to dig deeper. If Victor wanted to play dirty, we would expose every skeleton in his closet. And what we uncovered nearly brought me to my knees. Hidden in old financial records and documents from his previous marriages, we found a trail of fraud, embezzlement, and even blackmail. He had left behind a string of ruined families, always walking away richer while others suffered. My daughter was just his latest victim. We took everything to the police. This time, they listened. A formal investigation was launched, and within weeks, Victor was arrested on charges that went far beyond our custody battle. Fraud, coercion, even identity theft. I will never forget the day they led him away in handcuffs, his face pale with fury. He looked at me as he passed his eyes, promising vengeance. But for the first time, I wasn't afraid. Because this time, he couldn't hide behind lies. The trial dragged on for months, but the evidence was overwhelming. Witness after witness testified against him, painting a picture of a man who thrived on destruction. My daughter testified too, her voice strong and clear as she recounted years of manipulation. I held her hand afterward, whispering how proud I was. When the verdict came guilty on multiple counts, tears of relief streamed down my face. He was sentenced to years in prison, and though I knew scars remained, I also knew we were finally free. But the real healing came afterward. One evening, months later, I walked into the living room to find my daughter curled up on the couch, her children nestled against her. They were laughing together, a sound I hadn't heard in so long. It felt like a miracle. She looked up at me, her eyes shining. "Thank you, Mom," she said softly, "for saving them, for saving me." I sat beside her, wrapping my arms around them all. "We saved each other," I whispered. The road ahead wasn't easy. Trust takes time to rebuild, and the past doesn't vanish overnight. But step by step, day by day, we were mending. And as I watched my grandchildren grow, their laughter filling the house once more, I realized something profound. Love had carried us through every storm, even the darkest ones. And if love could survive all of this, then maybe, just maybe, it could heal anything. So to anyone listening to my story, if you've ever been betrayed, abandoned, or made to feel powerless, please hear me. You are stronger than you know. Even when the world tries to break you, even when those you love wound you the deepest, there is always a way back to hope. If this story touched you, please take a moment to like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe for more stories like this. And most importantly, leave a comment below. Tell me your story, your pain, your hope. Because when we share our stories, we remind each other that we are not alone.